Have you ever felt betrayed in the very place where you believed you were most safe? Have you ever experienced the pain of being judged and silenced by those who should have supported you? These questions aren't just rhetorical. They carry scars that many Christian women know well. My name is Mary Johnson. I'm 49 years old, and today I'm going to open my heart to you like never before. This isn't a made-up story. It's a profound account, filled with faith, tears, and an intense search for answers that seemed never to come. I grew up believing that marriage was sacred, that the covenant before God was inviolable. I believed that love and dedication would be enough to sustain any relationship. But what happens when betrayal enters through the door that should have been guarded by trust? And what happens when emotional abandonment occurs within faith itself? Does this situation sound familiar? Perhaps you too have felt the weight of carrying guilt that wasn't yours, or of listening to advice that, instead of healing, only opened the wounds even further. I remember it as if it were yesterday, the looks, the murmurs, the silence of those who should have been a voice of comfort. The judgment didn't just come from outside, it also invaded my heart, trying to convince me that I wasn't enough, that I had failed as a wife, as a woman, and even as a Christian. Brace yourself. What's coming next will shock you. Because when betrayal happens within the faith, the impact isn't just on the marriage, it shakes the deepest structures of the soul. And that's exactly what I want to talk about how the pain of betrayal can become even more cruel when mixed with abandonment and silencing, about how the church, which should be a place of healing, can become a stage of judgment. Don't leave now. The best is yet to come, because this is a true story, a journey of tears, prayer, and courage, a story that may reflect yours or that of someone very close to you. And as I go over every detail, I want you to brace yourself, because the hardest part is yet to be told. From a young age, I was active in church, dedicated to faith, and a marriage I believed was indestructible. I grew up involved in worship services, choir rehearsals, prayer meetings, and community activities that shaped my identity. I was seen as an example of a Christian woman, obedient, faithful, committed. When I met the man who would become my husband, everyone said it was a gift from God, a blessed union. And I believed it with all my heart. At the altar, as I said my vows, I felt I was building something eternal, a solid love story based on spiritual principles that nothing could shake. In the early years, life seemed perfect. We prayed together, planned for the future, and I saw myself living the dream of many women, being a wife, mother, and devoted servant. But behind the smiles and happy photos, there were subtle details I preferred not to see. Small actions that revealed distance, words that left scars, silences that weighed heavily. At the time, my mindset was that every marital challenge could be resolved with patience, prayer, and submission. I believed that enduring in silence was part of the mission of a virtuous wife. As the years passed, this silence began to corrode me. I sought advice from behind the scenes of faith, listening to sermons that reinforced the idea that women should hold firm and maintain their families at all costs. And so I gradually became detached, trying to believe that this discomfort was just a passing phase. The impact on my identity was profound. I set aside personal dreams, decisions that could have strengthened me, and even friendships that would have helped me see the hidden truth of my life. On the outside, I remained Mary, the woman of faith, whom everyone admired for her dedication. Inside, there was a silent struggle, an emptiness that grew larger every day. It wasn't just about marriage, it was about transformation, about the journey of a woman beginning to realize that not everything that shines inside the church is a sign of true light. The trust I had blindly placed in my life was beginning to crack, even though I tried to deny it. But there's something even more essential here, something few realize, because before betrayal manifests itself concretely, there are hidden signs, subtle revelations that we often ignore. It's about these signs that I want to continue, because they show how faith can become both a shelter and a prison. I got married believing he was the man God had chosen for me. That day, standing at the altar, my hands trembled, but it wasn't from fear, it was from emotion. I was absolutely certain I was experiencing the fulfillment of a promise. When I looked into his eyes and heard his words, I felt as if all of heaven were confirming that union. The idea of building a Christian home, raising children in faith, walking side by side in purpose, filled me completely. I saw in him not just a husband, but a spiritual companion, someone who would support me through difficult times and celebrate my victories with me. This was the dream I carried, marriage as an extension of God's grace in our lives. In the early days, this illusion seemed real. Mornings began with prayers, evenings ended with long conversations about projects, trips, and plans for the future. I believed every detail of our marriage was proof of divine blessing, and this mindset gave me security, as if nothing could touch us. However, as the dust of the honeymoon settled, small cracks began to appear that, at first glance, seemed harmless. A harsh comment here, an indifference there, a silence that stretched beyond what was acceptable. I told myself it was just fatigue, that the weight of responsibilities was taking its toll on us, and that soon everything would return to normal. Except that normal never returned. What at first seemed like mere distraction became a pattern. The kind words became rare, the affectionate gestures diminished, and the attention that once enveloped me began to be replaced by disguised absences. I tried to justify it, repeating that marriage is a journey, that every couple faces ups and downs. And so, without realizing it, I began to normalize what was already a sign of distance. Behind the scenes, my heart felt the impact, but I preferred to maintain the facade that everything was fine. There were nights when I watched him sleep and wondered where that man I'd fallen in love with was. Had he changed, or had I never truly known who he was? This doubt gnawed at me silently, but I stifled it with prayers and promises to myself that with faith, patience, and love, everything would change. This was my daily decision, to believe against the reality unfolding before me. The hardest part was dealing with the inner revelations I was trying to hide. I could tell something was wrong, but I preferred to believe it was just a phase. This choice to deny the hidden truth had profound consequences because it prevented me from seeing the signs that were already clear. And when you close your eyes for too long, life ends up forcing you to face what you were avoiding. That's exactly what happened to me, and the way reality came to light completely changed the trajectory of my story. But even in the beginning, there were things I chose not to see. I thought love and faith would solve everything. I vividly remember small behaviors that seemed strange, but which I quickly justified. He would arrive home late from work, avoid long conversations, and seem impatient when I mentioned dreams or projects involving both of us. I sensed, deep down, that something wasn't right, but I quickly suppressed that intuition with the hope that everything would make sense later. My mindset at the time was that the marriage needed to be protected at all costs, and if that meant swallowing resentment and silencing perceptions, I was willing to pay that price. There was one episode that stuck with me. I had prepared a special dinner, one of those simple yet meaningful ones, because I wanted to celebrate a small achievement in our daily lives. When he arrived, he barely glanced at the table, said he was tired, and shut himself in his room. That hurt me, but instead of seeing it as a sign of emotional distance, I turned it into an excuse. He just needs to rest. Tomorrow will be different, I repeated to myself. This decision to not see the hidden truth stayed with me for a long time, creating a pattern of tolerance for silence and indifference. However, the impact of this behavior began to erode parts of me I hadn't yet realized. The love I believed to be unshakable became a burden, and faith, which had always brought me comfort, began to be used as an argument to justify its absence. Behind the scenes, there was a woman trying to convince herself that everything was under control, when in reality, I was losing myself. It's curious how the mind creates defense mechanisms to endure pain, but these mechanisms also distance us from clarity, and clarity is what allows us to make conscious decisions, even if they are painful. With each prolonged silence, each moment of inattention, I clung to the idea that time would resolve the issue. This journey of denial seemed easier than facing the discomfort of admitting something wasn't right. I told myself that marriage requires sacrifice, that transformation would come, that God would restore what was being lost. But inside me, a small voice insisted that there was more behind that coldness. Revelations still hidden, signs I didn't want to face, and it was precisely this refusal to look directly at it that created space for the distance between us to grow, until the moment came when it would no longer be possible to pretend everything was okay. With each new silence, I felt a greater weight within me, as if my prayers echoed in a void, and even trying to hide it, this pain began to overflow into the details of my life. Perhaps that's why, by sharing this story, I feel like it's not just about me. Many women have been through or are still going through similar situations, and I know how important it is to give voice to these experiences. It's precisely because I believe in this impact that I want to ask you something very simple, but one that makes all the difference. If this topic resonates with you, if at any point you've identified with or been touched by what I said, please like this video. It may seem small, but it's precisely this participation that makes this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Your presence here helps build a community of support, empathy, and truth. When you leave this gesture of support, it's not just for me. It's as if you're telling other women that they're not alone, that there's room to share their pain and also to find hope. And that moves me, because I know how devastating silence can be when we have nowhere to turn. That's why every like, every comment is like a hand extended to those who haven't yet had the courage to tell their own story. And as I share this part of my journey, I want you to feel like you're walking with me, because everything I've experienced, every detail, every revelation is part of a journey that's not just mine. There's still much to be said, and what came after these first signs was even more profound and transformative. Over time, I realized that dialogue had disappeared. I prayed, but he became increasingly withdrawn. Conversations that were once long and full of plans turned into short, monosyllabic answers, and a silence that filled the spaces of the house like a constant shadow. It was the kind of silence that never rests, that doesn't bring peace, but rather weighs and suffocates. At first, I tried to break down this wall patiently, asking about his day, making small talk. But it was like talking to a wall. His gaze would wander. His hands were always busy with something else, and I felt like an invisible presence inside the home that should have been a refuge. This silence became a ghost that haunted me at all times. At the table, we felt the absence of words more than the presence of food. In the bedroom, the distance wasn't just physical, but emotional. An invisible barrier that made me feel increasingly alone even when I was with someone. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that all marriages have their cooling moments. But the hidden truth was that this silence had deep roots. He wasn't just tired or distracted. There was something hidden, something I didn't yet have the courage to face. With each failed attempt at dialogue, my faith was tested. I sought answers in prayer, believing that God would give me the strength to endure, and that somehow this distance would bring about a greater transformation down the road. But in practice, I felt abandoned. I was on a lonely journey within a marriage that should have been a partnership, and this impact began to affect other areas: my mood, my self-esteem, even the way I related to people at church. I, who always smiled, began to use that smile as a mask, hiding the hidden depths of my married life. It was a silence that hurt because it gave me no answers, and the absence of answers opens the door to the worst interpretations. Was I no longer enough? Had he lost interest? Or was there a truth I wasn't ready to hear? These questions haunted me. Every night, and without even realizing it, I let fear make decisions for me. Instead of confronting it, I withdrew. Instead of demanding clarity, I remained silent. And so, little by little, I became hostage to a silence that said more than any words could, paving the way for something even more painful to come. It was on an ordinary day that I found the messages. My world fell apart right there. I wasn't looking for anything. I hadn't planned to snoop, nor did I suspect that this would be the moment my entire reality would be turned upside down. It was just another routine morning, and while I was tidying up a few things, his phone vibrated on the table. It wasn't unusual to receive notifications, but something about that moment caught my attention. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was that inner voice I'd long tried to silence, but which insisted on warning me. I picked up the phone, and within seconds, my hands were shaking. There, before me, were words that could not be interpreted any other way. Messages charged with intimacy, secrets, and complicity that had no place in our marriage. The shock was immediate, as if a part of me had shut down. My breath became shallow, my heart raced, and I felt as if I'd lost my footing. Even though the signs had been there for some time, seeing the betrayal laid bare in banal phrases and emojis was devastating. I wondered if I was dreaming, if my eyes were truly seeing it. But there was no denying it. The hidden truth I'd avoided facing was staring me in the face, cold and cruel. From that moment on, everything took on a new color. His silence, his vague excuses, his disguised absences, everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle I'd never intended to put together. It was as if the revelations were cascading down, and every memory of the past few months hit me like a hammer. The ignored dinner, the distant glances, the short words, everything now had an explanation. My mind wandered through the backstories of the Sioux relationship, reconstructing dialogues and situations, and I felt deceived not only as a wife, but as a woman who blindly believed in fidelity within faith. I gripped my phone so tightly my hands ached. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just stand there, paralyzed. I felt like I was at a crossroads. The decisions I made from that moment on could change my story forever. And yet, for a few seconds, my instinct wasn't to confront, but to deny. I wanted to delete those messages, pretend I hadn't seen anything, rewind a few minutes, and regain the ignorance that protected me. But once the truth is revealed, there's no going back. The heart can no longer deceive itself in the same way. As tears streamed down my face, I realized that the journey I thought I was experiencing with a companion was, in fact, a lonely one. The trust I had given so purely had been broken, and the most painful thing was understanding that the betrayal was not only against me, but against the values that sustained our union. It was as if the covenant made before God had been torn apart, and I wondered how to rebuild something on such profound ruins. At that moment, I understood that this wasn't just marital betrayal, but something much bigger, the destruction of an emotional, spiritual, and even mental foundation that had guided me for years. And this was just the first step in an even harsher revelation, because the discovery didn't just bring pain, it also brought the need to face what came next, and that part was even harder to bear. I felt torn apart inside. It wasn't just my husband, it was a brother in faith who had betrayed me. This realization brought a double pain, because it involved not only a breach of trust in marriage, but also the breaking of a spiritual covenant, something I believed was protected by God's presence. It was as if my life had been split into two parts, before and after that revelation. The image I had of him, built over years, was shattered in seconds. That man I saw beside me at the altar, who held my hand during prayers, who led worship at church, now revealed himself in a role I never wanted to see. The impact was devastating. The feeling of betrayal wasn't just personal, it invaded every aspect of my identity. I wondered, how could I believe in love again? How could I trust words that once sounded so secure? It was as if every statement he had made in the past was now tainted, as if it had all been staged. This revelation shook my mindset, because I couldn't separate the man from the spiritual leader, the husband from the brother in faith. What I saw was a tangle of lies crumbling before me. I spent entire nights recalling details, replaying conversations, trying to understand where our story went astray. I blamed myself for not realizing it sooner, questioning the decisions I'd made along the way, believing I might have ignored clear signs. The hidden truth, however, was that the betrayal wasn't a reflection of my failure, but of his choice to live a double life. Still, the pain didn't lessen. There was something profound and cruel in realizing that someone who preached fidelity, love, and commitment to God was the same one who was shattering all of that in the shadows. It felt like carrying an invisible weight, as if my chest were being crushed from within. At every church meeting, with every glance from acquaintances, I felt as if a secret was written all over my face. And even without telling anyone, I already felt judged. This was the point at which I realized that betrayal destroys not only a relationship, but also the trust in the space that should be the safest. Home was no longer a refuge, and faith, though it remained my strength, seemed shrouded in doubt. It was in this abyss of pain that I realized there was no longer any escape from reality. The impact wasn't just on me as a wife, but on everything I believed to be solid. And this shock opened the door to something even more painful, because when I tried to seek support, I discovered that the answer wouldn't be the welcome I'd hoped for, but a new wound coming from the very community where I thought I'd find shelter. When I sought support, I heard judgment, silence, and even phrases like, "Forgive and move on." I expected open arms, acceptance, perhaps even tears shared with my own. But what I found was a wall even higher than the one that already separated me at home. People looked at me strangely. Some avoided the subject. Others offered ready-made words, as if it were simple to erase the pain with an automatic prayer. It was at that moment that I realized that the community I had always considered spiritual family struggled to deal with real wounds, especially when they involved betrayal. The reaction wasn't just indifference, but veiled judgment. Phrases like, "You need to pray more," or "A wise woman builds her house," repeated like a broken record. I knew there was no shortage of prayer in my life, and I also knew it wasn't a lack of effort that had brought us to this point. Still, it seemed the responsibility was always mine. The collective mindset was clear. Saving face mattered more than exposing the hidden truth. It was more acceptable to see me endure in silence than to acknowledge the devastating impact of a marriage marked by infidelity. This weight crushed me because I was already fragile, trying to figure out how to move forward, and instead of finding support, I felt like I was being pushed further into the abyss. Behind the scenes at church, I noticed whispers, sidelong glances. Even people who had previously treated me kindly began to distance themselves, as if my pain were contagious. It was too lonely to carry all that, and the contrast between the image of perfect community and the cold reality of my needs was suffocating. With each superficial piece of advice I received, I wondered, can't anyone see that the problem wasn't just mine? Is it more comfortable for everyone to keep me as the culprit than to admit that a leader, a respected brother, had broken such serious vows? This revelation about the church's stance opened my eyes to something bigger. It wasn't just my story that was at stake, but also the way many women are treated when their lives don't follow the ideal script. I felt I was at a crossroads. I could remain silent and accept the role they were trying to impose on me, or I could face this reality head-on, even if it cost me relationships, reputation, and even my position in that community. It was a painful but necessary decision. And it was at that point that I realized that the greatest battle was not just against my husband's betrayal, but against the silence the church imposed on me, transforming my journey of grief into a taboo no one wanted to face. And this discovery only intensified the wound, because when I needed it most, I realized I would be alone in taking the next steps. I began to carry a guilt that wasn't mine, as if I had failed as a wife and a woman of God. This weight consumed me daily, because with every word I heard, with every sidelong glance, it felt like the finger was always pointed at me. I knew I hadn't been responsible for the betrayal, but it was as if the entire narrative had been distorted to make me look guilty, as if I hadn't prayed enough, cared enough, or done more than I already did. It was an unfair burden, but one I silently accepted for a while. The judgment wasn't just external. It began to seep into me. My mindset, which had always been strengthened by faith, was becoming contaminated by thoughts of failure. I looked in the mirror and no longer saw the confident woman who believed in God's purpose for her life, but someone broken, marked by a history that seemed to have lost its way. The impact of this judgment was devastating because it wasn't limited to my marriage. It affected my identity, my self-esteem, and even my relationship with God. At church, all it took was someone commenting, maybe she should have endured more, for my wounds to open even wider. It was like living in an invisible prison where everyone expected me to be the resilient wife, willing to forgive endlessly, without question, without complaint. This expectation suffocated me because it completely ignored the hidden truth of what I was experiencing. The destruction of a home because of his choices, but admitting it out loud felt forbidden. The silence surrounding me belonged not only to my husband, but now also to the community that was supposed to strengthen me. I found myself in a maze of difficult decisions. Should I keep trying to salvage what was already in ruins just to save face? Or should I accept that my journey would take a different direction, even if it meant being singled out as the woman who didn't fight hard enough? The revelations that surfaced within me were painful, for they forced me to acknowledge that living to please others would never be the path to true transformation. Still, guilt haunted me like a shadow. This invisible weight shaped my days, and I walked between fake smiles and hidden tears, always trying to balance the image of faith they expected of me with the real pain I carried. It was in this suffocating scenario that I realized something inside me was about to change, because no one can sustain for long a burden that never belonged to them. And this realization was the beginning of a silent rupture, which would lead me to face not only the judgment of others, but the need to free myself from it. He didn't leave me physically immediately, but he was no longer there with me. It was as if a body were present in the house, but the soul, the essence of the companion I once knew, had long since departed. Conversations became rare and then disappeared, eyes no longer met, and the routine, once divided, became marked by heavy silences that screamed louder than any words. I could be sitting next to him on the couch and still feel the deepest loneliness, as if we were two strangers sharing the same roof. This kind of abandonment is cruel because you don't realize it all at once. It slowly erodes until one day you realize you're trying to hold on to a relationship that no longer exists. The emotional absence affected me in ways I couldn't explain. I found myself questioning my own actions, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I'd stopped being enough. The hidden truth, however, was that I was facing a void created by choices that weren't mine. He was there, but he wasn't with me, and this contradiction became unbearable. The small kindnesses disappeared, the affection faded, and even the way he called me changed. Intimacy gave way to distance, and distance became our new normal. It was like living in a house full of invisible walls. I tried to break through them with gestures, with conversations, with prayers, but it seemed each attempt only increased the barrier between us. The feeling of silent rejection has a devastating impact because it leaves no concrete evidence, no witnesses, but it secretly undermines the soul. I carried within me the hope that one day he would return to his former self, but at the same time, I already knew that perhaps that would never happen. This emotional abandonment placed me at an internal crossroads. I could continue pretending everything was fine, preserving the image of a perfect marriage for the church's backstage, or I could face head-on the reality that there was no longer any reciprocity. With each sleepless night, the weight of loneliness grew, and I understood that it was impossible to sustain a relationship where only one person was truly present. Still, part of me insisted that resisting was the only way to avoid losing everything. This conflict between what I felt and what I showed the world consumed me silently. I knew I was being abandoned without him having to leave, and perhaps that was even more painful than the physical departure, because the body that is without the soul it loves is merely a constant reminder of what has already been lost. And it was in this scenario of irreversible separation that I realized the struggle for restoration would be much harder than I imagined, because it wasn't just about rebuilding a marriage, but about rescuing myself amidst the darkness of that emptiness. For a time, I tried to save my marriage. I believed that prayer would change everything. That was the decision I made amidst the chaos, to hold on tight, to fight with the weapons I knew, to believe that transformation would come. I clung to the idea that faith could heal any wound, that love endured all things, and that if I was patient enough, he would return to the man he'd always been. I spent days and nights fasting, kneeling until I fell asleep on the cold floor, crying silently so no one would hear the extent of my pain. I struggled to rebuild what was already in ruins. I did everything I could to rekindle the flame. I prepared surprises, wrote letters, organized family moments, but his gaze remained distant, as if my presence were just another detail in his routine. This constant attempt wore me down because, while I offered my whole heart, he seemed to offer only fragments of attention. And yet I persisted, like someone holding a broken, bleeding glass, believing that the pieces are worth putting back together. The impact of this choice was profound. I further deflated myself, setting aside personal needs and dreams that once gave me strength, all in the name of a restoration that seemed increasingly impossible. And the more I surrendered, the more I realized I was fighting alone. It was like rowing against an endless current. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move forward. The hidden truth, which I still resisted admitting, was that he was no longer willing to fight with me. In the shadows of my mind, revelations began to emerge. It wasn't a lack of prayer, nor a lack of dedication. It was a lack of choice on his part. And as painful as it was to acknowledge, I was trying to hold on to someone I'd already decided to let go of. This realization brought me a mixture of pain and clarity. It was a shock that shook my mindset, because until then, I'd believed marriage only required more patience and faith. But there was something beyond my control, and it presented me with a dilemma impossible to ignore. Even so, during this period, my every gesture was a cry of hope. I believed that perhaps one day he would look at me and see the woman who had been by his side through thick and thin. But that look never came. What followed was only an increasingly cold silence, until I realized that fighting like that was destroying me more than saving me. And it was at that point that I began to understand that, to move forward, I would have to make an even more difficult decision, one that would forever change my life's journey. Until one day I said, enough. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about my life before God. It was as if, after so long living inside a labyrinth, I had finally found the way out, even though I didn't know exactly what awaited me outside. This decision didn't come suddenly. It was forged silently, through sleepless nights, tearful prayers, and moments of reflection when I realized there was no going back to the relationship we were in. I had reached my limit. Continuing in that condition meant losing myself completely, and I could no longer accept living a lifetime, trapped in a love that no longer existed. The confrontation was simple, but intense. There was no shouting, no accusations. There was a firmness I had never felt before. When I looked him in the eye and told him I wasn't willing to continue pretending, I realized that, for the first time, my voice wasn't shaking. I no longer spoke like a wife begging for attention, or a woman trying to save a marriage. I spoke like someone who had understood the value of her own dignity. It was in that moment that I understood that, behind all that pain, a transformation was taking place. He looked at me in surprise, perhaps because he never believed I had the courage to speak out. Always confident that the weight of religion, the church's gaze, and even guilt would keep me silent. He didn't expect to hear the word, enough, but I said it. I said it because I needed to reclaim my own story. I said it because, if I continued in that emotional prison, my faith would become distorted, fueled by fear instead of hope. The impact of this confrontation was immediate. I felt light and heavy at the same time. Light for finally breaking the chains that bound me to an empty relationship. Heavy for understanding that the next decisions would require courage to deal with judgments, criticism, and even losses I didn't want to face. But at that moment, there was no turning back. It was like walking through a door and knowing it would close behind me forever. Behind the scenes of my heart, a new awareness was beginning to form. I realized that this confrontation wasn't just between me and him, but between me and the fear that had kept me trapped for so many years. It was a turning point in my journey, a point at which revealing the truth became more important than the appearance of stability. And even without knowing what would come next, I knew I could no longer back down. The path was set, and from then on, each step would be marked by choices that would forever change how I saw myself and the life that was yet to come. When I finally found the strength to say enough, I realized that many women could relate to that moment of rupture, because it wasn't just my story, but something much bigger, the courage to break free from what imprisons us. And it's precisely because I know this experience isn't just mine that I want to open up space for you too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, or even your own experience. Every shared word creates a supportive environment, a community where no woman needs to feel alone in the pain she carries. It's important for you to know that your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. When you comment, like, and subscribe, it's not just a simple gesture on the screen. It's like you're saying, this message needs to reach more people. And I truly believe this, because stories like mine can become a beacon of light for other women who currently live in the darkness of silence and fear. Therefore, I want you to feel this space as a safe place to open your heart. Your comment may be exactly what another woman needs to read to find strength. And as I share this journey with you, I also continue to grow stronger, because I know that each exchange, each story, is proof that together we can weather any storm. And so it was, amidst exposed pain and inevitable revelations, that I took the next steps on a journey that, even though full of scars, was beginning to lead me to a new understanding of what freedom truly means. Signing the divorce decree felt like a death sentence, but it was also a new beginning. I remember the day I held that pen and felt my hands tremble. It was as if each stroke on the paper was confirmation that a part of my life had come to an end. I cried, not only for what I was losing, but for the symbolic weight of that act. The marriage I had once believed to be eternal was officially being dissolved before my eyes. No matter how many times I rehearsed this moment in my mind, the reality was harsh, icy, almost suffocating. Yet, along with this sense of finality, there was something I hadn't expected, a quiet relief. It was as if, at the same time as one door closed, another was opening before me. I understood that, despite all the pain, this was the first step toward a new journey, a stage where I would no longer have to live a prisoner of abandonment, nor carry alone the burden of a love that no longer existed. The emotional impact was immense, but amid the tears, there was also room for a glimmer of hope. Divorce forced me to face a transformation in my own mindset. I could no longer define myself solely as a wife, nor could I hide behind the title of married woman to maintain a semblance of status in the community. Now I needed to rediscover myself, rebuild my identity, and that required courage. It was painful to see a dream crumble, but even more painful would have been to remain in something that destroyed me every day. I realized that often, a new beginning is born precisely at the point where we believe it is the end. The inner revelations this process brought were intense. I realized that for years, I had lived more to maintain an image than to nurture the truth of my relationship. Divorce tore away that mask and made me see clearly the life I was truly leading. This awareness didn't come gently. It was harsh, relentless, but necessary, because only when the hidden truth is revealed do we have the chance to make decisions that truly free us. Behind the scenes of this experience, I faced disapproving looks, malicious comments, and even people who treated me as if I had failed not only as a wife, but as a woman of faith. And yet deep inside, something told me I was on the right path. It was like walking through rubble, but seeing in the distance a light beckoning me forward. This mixture of pain and hope accompanied me every step of the way, and I knew that from that moment on, a new phase began, one that would still bring challenges, but also the possibility of discovering strengths I never imagined I had. I remember sleepless nights wondering, who will accept me now? A divorced Christian woman? The silence in the room seemed even heavier at those times, and the questions came like arrows that wouldn't let me rest. I would stare at the ceiling and feel the shadow of loneliness surround me, as if the whole world had suddenly become hostile. The pain of separation was already great, but the fear of what would come next seemed even greater. I felt marked, carrying an invisible label that would forever change the way people saw me. I wondered if I could rebuild my life, if I was worthy of starting over, or if I would be condemned to live on the margins, carrying a stigma so many women know all too well. The mentality I had absorbed during years of living within the church told me that divorce was a failure, an irreversible failure. And even though I knew I had done everything to save that marriage, I still carried the feeling of guilt. The impact of this belief was devastating, because it wasn't just an external judgment, but an internal voice that insisted on accusing me. The nights were the cruelest, because it was then that the loneliness became unbearable. I thought about the backstories of my life, about everything I had lost, and wondered if I would ever find a place where I belonged again. Memories came like waves. The laughter that no longer existed, the plans that would never come to fruition, the home that had silently crumbled. I felt small in the face of the future, like someone who must cross a desert without the certainty of finding water along the way. Fear mingled with the revelations that surfaced in my mind. I realized that, more than fearing the judgment of others, I feared the emptiness within myself. The journey thus far had shown me that I could endure the pain of betrayal, but dealing with the feeling of worthlessness seemed much more difficult. It was as if with each thought I had to decide between sinking deeper or seeking strength from somewhere I didn't know existed. Yet, amidst this darkness, a small flame insisted on remaining lit. It was the reminder that my story couldn't end there. As much as fear surrounded me, I knew there was something inside me that needed to be awakened. This awareness began to germinate slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it reminded me that loneliness didn't have to be the end. And it was in this mixture of pain and hope that I took the first steps toward facing not only external judgment, but the even greater challenge of finding myself again. It was at rock bottom that I discovered that God never left me. He was with me all along. In the moments when loneliness seemed to scream loudest, when tears flowed without the strength to hold them back, I realized there was a silent presence sustaining me. It wasn't something visible, but an almost indescribable feeling that, despite the emptiness around me, I wasn't alone. It was as if, at the very moment I thought I would fall apart, an invisible hand lifted me up and reminded me that there was still life within me. This revelation changed everything. I expected to find God only in grand answers, in miracles that would transform my surroundings, but I found Him deep within my heart, in the midst of raw pain. It was there, behind the scenes of my own weakness, that the hidden truth began to reveal itself. I didn't need to be whole to be loved. I didn't need to be perfect to be sustained. Transformation didn't come with an immediate change in circumstances, but with the realization that, even in broken pieces, I was still precious in His eyes. Every morning I managed to get up, even without strength. I felt a silent decision taking place within me. I chose to believe, even though my faith was weary, and this choice, repeated day after day, began to take root in places that had previously held only fear. It was as if my journey, marked by tears and insecurities, was being used as fertile ground for something new. This realization had a profound impact. It wasn't about erasing the scars, but about finding beauty in them, as living testimony that I had survived. Over time, I began to understand that the strength I sought was not within myself, but in what He had already placed within me from the beginning. I simply needed to allow it to surface. And this discovery wasn't instantaneous. It was a process, a patient process, where each small step mattered. Sleepless nights turned into intimate conversations with God, and silent days were filled with revelations that reminded me that I hadn't been forgotten. And it was precisely at the point where I least believed in new beginnings that this flame began to grow. It wasn't a fire of euphoria, but a constant, discreet ember that warmed me even on the coldest days. That's how I understood that true strength isn't born from the absence of failures, but from the certainty that, even when all seems lost, a purpose is being built in the invisible. And this awareness paved the way for me to see that every weakness could be transformed into an invitation to something greater. I found sisters of faith who welcomed me, listened to me without judgment, and cried with me. It was in this environment of trust that I realized the importance of true support, the kind that doesn't require masks or rehearsed speeches. These were women who also bore their own scars, and precisely because of this, they knew the pain that overflowed my eyes before I could even put it into words. This genuine care didn't erase the weight of my story, but it reminded me, day after day, that I didn't have to go through this journey alone. The impact of being surrounded by people who not only offered advice but were willing to sit beside me in silence was transformative. It was as if God had placed these voices in my path to show me that life is made of sharing, that even desserts become less arid when someone walks beside us. I realized that true love is revealed behind the scenes, in small actions, in gestures that don't need the spotlight. It was in this space that I learned to value vulnerability as a bridge, not a weakness. The mentality I'd held until then, that I had to be strong at all costs, began to unravel as the hidden truth revealed itself. Strength doesn't lie in bearing everything alone, but in allowing yourself to be cared for. There were days when a simple prayer together would rekindle within me the flame I'd thought had died out. There were afternoons when the embrace of someone who knew the same kind of pain was more healing than any words. This support network became not only a relief, but a reminder that God also works through people. And it was in this process that I understood something even more profound. Accepting help didn't diminish my faith. On the contrary, it expanded it. It was an exercise in humility, a recognition that no one wins life's battles alone. Decisions that seemed impossible to make alone became lighter when shared. Painful revelations became less burdensome when exposed to hearts willing to listen. And in this scenario, fear gave way to hope, while the certainty that a new beginning was possible became increasingly real. This learning shaped my journey because I understood that scars gain meaning when they become a testimony to strengthen others. The journey was no longer just about my survival, but also about how my experience could make an impact. It was then that I realized that what began in tears was being transformed into the seed of something greater, and that this movement of sharing and acceptance would have consequences I couldn't even imagine. I learned that I am not defined by my marriage, but by God's love for me. This revelation changed the way I saw myself in the mirror and in the world. It was as if a heavy curtain had been lifted from my eyes, revealing a hidden truth that had always been there. My identity was not tied to the surname I carried, nor to the scars left by a relationship that ended. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my story could be rewritten from a place of freedom, not shame. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs, with each decision pushing me a little further out of the emotional prison I had built for myself. I began to question patterns I had previously accepted without thinking, as if they were immutable rules. I began to realize that many of the beliefs that limited me came not from God, but from external voices trying to dictate my worth. Recognizing this, a new mindset was born within me. I no longer needed to conform to labels or expectations that never belonged to me. It was on this path that I experienced the most powerful reconstruction of my life. I understood that starting over isn't about erasing the past, but about giving it new meaning. The wounds became reminders of battles won, and every tear I shed became a testament to resilience. This journey made me understand that there's a unique beauty in embracing the behind-the-scenes aspects of one's life, those moments no one sees but that shape our essence. Because it was precisely there, far from the applause and the appearance of perfection, that God worked on my identity in the most profound way. Gradually, I began to see myself no longer as a victim of a broken story, but as the protagonist of a constantly unfolding journey. I discovered gifts that had been dormant, strengths I never thought I possessed, and dreams that previously seemed too distant. The impact of this rediscovery was so great that even the way I related to others changed. I no longer sought acceptance at any cost, because I understood that the highest price had already been paid for me. This awareness opened the door for different decisions, more aligned with the truth of who I am. I learned to say no to what didn't reflect love and purpose, and to say yes to opportunities that challenged me to grow. It was a silent shift, but one with powerful effects, reshaping not only my self-esteem, but also the way I navigate the world. And it was precisely on this journey that I realized that rebuilding identity isn't an end point, but an ongoing process, full of new layers, where each revelation brings us closer to the essence God had already designed from the beginning. Today I am stronger, more aware, and much freer in Christ. These words seem simple, but they carry a depth that only those who have experienced ruptures and reconstructions can understand. This new version of me wasn't born from a magical moment, but from the sum of countless falls and new beginnings, of dark nights that seemed endless, and mornings when hope, however fragile, insisted on being reborn. It's curious to realize how life has this way of stripping us of everything we believe to be essential, only to reveal that, in truth, we were stronger without so many adornments, truer without so many masks. The Mary of old sought approval, feared judgment, and felt trapped by expectations that never seemed met. The Mary of today bears scars, not as marks of defeat, but as medals from a battle won in her soul. Every pain, every silence, every tear shed became fuel for this transformation. It wasn't just a shedding of skin, but a metamorphosis that redefined my mindset, my decisions, and even the way I walk with God and myself. The freedom I found in Christ is not the kind the world sells, full of superficial promises, but a freedom born from within, from the certainty that nothing can hold us back when we know who sustains us. This awareness has brought me a peace that no longer depends on circumstances. I've learned to live with less fear of the future and more confidence in the present, because I know there's a purpose in every detail of the journey. This hidden truth, which so often goes unnoticed, is precisely what keeps us standing when everything around us seems to be crumbling. Today, looking back, I see the behind the scenes of my own story as a training ground. It was there, in the moments when no one applauded, that I learned to listen to God's voice more than external voices. It was there that I understood that the real impact of life lies not in how many approve of us, but in how faithful we remain to the essence He gave us. This new Mary is not perfect, but she is whole. She is not without flaws, but she is aware that every mistake can be transformed into a learning experience, and every failure can generate new hidden strengths. And perhaps most revealing of all is realizing that freedom in Christ hasn't isolated me, but rather connected me more authentically with the people around me. Before, I hid for fear of rejection. Now, I understand that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's a bridge. When I open my heart and share my pain and triumphs, I see how it touches other hearts that also carry their own silences. The new Mary learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward even when trembling inside. This process has shown me that life is less about striving for perfection and more about learning to walk truthfully. There is no greater freedom than this, being able to be who you truly are, knowing that God's love doesn't change with your failures or achievements. This transformed mindset allows me to live more lightly, free from the chains of old labels that imprisoned me. And deep down, this is what it means to be freer in Christ, not the absence of challenges, but the presence of meaning in every step. And it was precisely at this point that I understood something even more profound. The new Mary is not just a result of the pains overcome, but also the beginning of something much greater that is still being revealed. I know my story could be similar to many women listening right now, and perhaps that's precisely why it needs to be told unfiltered. Because in my pain may be a reflection of yours, and in my victories may lie the hope you seek today. The impact of a journey lies not only in the happy chapters, but in the hidden truth revealed behind the scenes, in what almost no one sees. The moments of silence, the doubts that keep you awake at night, the tears hidden behind a forced smile. It's there that life shapes, tests, and transforms. I'm different from so many others who also carry scars, who have felt trapped by judgments and decisions that seemed definitive. The difference is that I chose not to let pain have the final say. I've discovered that when a woman stands up, she doesn't just stand up for herself, but paves the way for others to find courage as well. This is true collective strength, an individual journey that impacts many other stories. And do you know what impresses me most? The way God uses every detail, even what seemed meaningless, to weave a greater purpose. Today I understand that no tear was in vain, that every struggle carried a revelation that prepared me for this moment. It was in the valley that I realized the depth of faith. It was in solitude that I discovered my identity. And it was in rejection that I learned to see love more broadly, more truthfully. This new mindset didn't come from theories or ready-made phrases, but from real experiences that broke me and, at the same time, rebuilt me. Perhaps you've also felt that your life has lost its direction, that those around you don't understand the intensity of your struggle. But that's the beauty. Stories like mine show that there is a way out, that there is a path where before there was only darkness. And it's not just about personal overcoming, but about legacy. When a life is transformed, it becomes a living testament to the fact that hope never dies. This is the revelation I've learned through experience. Our scars can become maps for other women still trying to find direction. And it's at this point that I realize my story is no longer just mine. It echoes, resonates, finds hearts I may never have the chance to meet personally, but who will feel its impact. Because when the truth is spoken with vulnerability, it breaks down barriers and reaches places strength alone could never reach. That's how I understood that what seemed like just another personal pain was actually part of a much greater purpose. And it is. Precisely because I carry this awareness that I continue to tell each detail. Because I know that somehow what I learned can shine a light on paths that are still immersed in shadows. Don't ignore the signs. Don't accept silence as normal. And don't carry guilt that isn't yours. How often do we women end up believing we have to endure everything alone, as if it were part of an inevitable fate? This distorted mindset takes root deeply and makes us accept crumbs where we should demand respect. This wake-up call is necessary because behind every prolonged silence, there's a hidden truth that needs to be faced, a decision that needs to be made before the impact is even greater. Many end up living years in the shadows of pain, smiling on the outside while inside their hearts are broken. But carrying guilt that isn't ours is an invisible prison, a chain that can only be broken when courage speaks louder than fear. The weight that isn't yours shouldn't be on your shoulders. Recognizing this is an act of transformation, of liberation, of taking a deep breath again after so long trapped in other people's expectations. And when this revelation happens, something within us awakens to a completely new path, where the journey stops being about survival and becomes about truly living. I understood that human betrayal does not nullify God's faithfulness. This was perhaps the most powerful revelation of my journey, because it made me see that, behind the pain, there was a greater purpose under construction. We often place absolute trust in people, believing they will be our safe haven, but we forget that even the most well-intentioned heart can fail, can give in, can disappoint us. God's faithfulness, however, remains intact, like an anchor that does not move in the face of storms. It was with this understanding that my mindset began to shift. I stopped seeking validation in human hands and began to strengthen myself in the certainty that I am not alone, never have been, and never will be. This learning was not just a consolation, but a transformation that gave me the freedom to clearly see behind the scenes of my choices and understand that pain is not the end, but a turning point capable of revealing a new identity. Today, I walk in peace, knowing that my life didn't end with divorce, but began with a new chance. This realization didn't come overnight, but was the result of a healing process that showed me that every ending can actually be the beginning of something greater. When I stopped looking back with regret and began to see my story through eyes of revelation, I realized that the wounds weren't just marks of pain, but living testimonies of overcoming. This transformation didn't erase the past, but gave me the courage to reframe it. What once seemed like failure now reveals itself as a path of growth, an awakening to more conscious decisions, and a mindset strengthened by faith. The hidden truth throughout this journey is that it wasn't the loss that defined me, but the way I chose to rise. And it is at this point that I understand that the journey doesn't end with falls, but blossoms in new beginnings, making room for something even deeper that continues to reveal itself. If this story spoke to your heart, it's because you somehow understand the weight and beauty of a journey that passes through pain, but finds in the midst of it an unexpected rebirth. Stories like these aren't just distant tales, but echoes of truths that span generations and touch our most intimate choices. When someone reveals the hidden depths of their life, revealing falls, difficult decisions, and the impact of seemingly unbearable upheavals, what they're really delivering is an invitation to transformation. Perhaps you know someone who silently carries guilt that doesn't belong to them, someone who needs a simple word to understand that there is still hope. This is the power of revelations, to shine a light where many believe there is only darkness. So don't keep this message to yourself. Make it an instrument of change, share it, comment on your impressions, and allow this space to become a meeting point for those seeking answers, strength, and new perspectives.